Over the past 2 decades, the airlines in the United Arab Emirates and Qatar have overturned the commercial aviation industry. Currently, there are more than 150 aviation-related projects in the region with a combined value of nearly $60 billion. As such, the monarchies in the Gulf region are home to some of the largest long-haul carriers in the world. However, in wake of the tensions across the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt have closed their airspaces to Qatar. This disruption to air travel has raised concerns for the future of the airlines across the region. In this report, we will go over the aviation implications of the current crisis, but we will also explain how the geo-economic circumstances have contributed to the success of Qatar Airways, Emirates Airline and Etihad Airways. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. If you have the means and if you would like to see more content like this, please support our fundraising page on patreon.com/Caspian Report. This year will mark the 20th anniversary of the state-owned Qatar Airways. In a relative short span of time, the company has expanded into one of the biggest brands in the Middle East. As of March 2017, its revenues stood at $10.6 billion, while its net profits stood at $540 million. Obviously, the current standoff between Qatar and the other Arab states is bad for business for the flag carrier. In fact, it is expected that Qatar Airways will be the biggest financial victim in the diplomatic crisis. Depending on the length of the airspace closure, as high as 30% of its revenues could be affected. Now, prior to the diplomatic crisis, Qatar Airways crossed the airspace of neighboring Saudi Arabia on their route to Europe and Africa. However, the closure of the Saudi airspace has forced Qatar Airways to alter its flight paths to Iran, Turkey and Oman. What's more is that Doha's international airport is restricted to a single entrance and exit route, which passes through the restricted airspace of Bahrain. Yet, regardless of Manama's closed airspace, which almost encircles Qatar, the flag carrier of Doha is still traveling through Bahrain's airspace. Some people may perceive this as a violation of Bahrain's sovereignty, but that is not necessarily true. The fact of the matter is that most of the modern civil aviation laws are based on the Chicago Convention of 1944. Signatories to the treaty recognized national sovereignties to airspaces, meaning a government can decide who lands on its territory and who does not. However, members of the transit agreement, as stipulated in the IASTA, adhere to additional protocols in which international flights can overfly the territories of the signatories on their way to a third destination. Now, Saudi Arabia adheres to the Chicago Convention, but it is not a member of the transit agreement, while Bahrain is a signatory to both protocols. In other words, Qatar Airways cannot fly or land in Saudi Arabia. However, due to the transit agreement, Qatar Airways can still legally fly over Bahrain's airspace. At least, that's the theory. In practice, however, there are no legal mechanisms to enforce aviation regulations. So, in most cases, whoever has the means can bend the rules accordingly. In any case, the recent changes to the flight paths of Qatar Airways have prolonged the flight hours to Africa and Europe, and this will affect the financial situation of the airline. Yet, the success of Qatar Airways and other flight carriers in the region have little to do with financial policy and everything to do with the geo-economic situation. The thing is, in the 1930s, the British Empire was the first to utilize its colonies in the Persian Gulf to gain an advantage in aviation. For instance, the Emirate of Sharjah, which is located in modern UAE, served as a transit hub for London and its distant domains in Sydney and Hong Kong. In this context, airports within 45 and 55 degrees longitude are located in between major population zones of Europe Asia, and Africa. This gives the respective host nations a unique advantage in the aviation industry. For instance, about a third of the global population resides within a 4-hour flight from Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. Meanwhile, 2/3 of the global population lives within an 8-hour flight from the Gulf airports. With this realization, the Arab monarchies in the Gulf region, fueled by energy revenues, focused towards dominating the aviation sectors in Europe, Asia, and Africa. In 1985, Dubai's Sheikh Mohammed decided to take advantage of the city's geographic location. He set aside $10 million in startup capital and helped to establish Emirates Airline. Shortly thereafter, in 1993, the government in Doha realized the need for a Middle Eastern transportation hub and established Qatar Airways as a direct competitor to Dubai's carrier. By the 1990s and 2000s, Dubai expanded its airport, opened new terminals and runways, which increased the annual passenger capacity from 18 million in 2003 to 83 million in 2016. Meanwhile, Doha embarked on a similar expansion and acquired hundreds of aircrafts for Qatar Airways. The endeavors by Dubai and Doha were such a success that in 2003, Abu Dhabi entered the aviation sector and established its own Etihad Airways and underwent a similar growth. Currently, with a fleet of 261 aircrafts and 140 destinations, Emirates Airline stands at the top of the aviation industry in the region. Qatar Airways comes at a close second with a fleet of 206 aircrafts and 151 destinations. Meanwhile, Etihad Airways has 124 aircrafts and serves 90 destinations. In any case, within a short span of time, the three airlines expanded into commercial multinationals and turned their respective nations into transportation hubs for long-haul international flights. It's noteworthy to mention that all three airlines have focused extensively on the acquisition of large-capacity aircrafts with high fuel efficiencies for destinations between 4 and 10 hours flight time, which includes the major population zones in Europe, Asia, and Africa. The thing is, if a flight is longer than 10 hours, fuel consumption turns inefficient and thus flight paths become economically less viable. On the other hand, if a flight is shorter than 4 hours, international airlines cannot compete with the domestic budget-based carriers. Therefore, a flight time between 4 and 10 hours is the target length for long-haul international carriers. The acquisition of large-capacity aircrafts and geographic advantage enabled the monarchies in the Gulf to become global transportation hubs for passengers as well as cargo. Yet the astonishing growth of the three airlines has not gone unnoticed in Europe and North America. Over the years, the activities of the Gulf airlines have severely damaged the market positions of their European and North American rivals. As such, in February 2017, President Trump met with the CEOs of United Airlines, American Airlines, and Delta Airlines and vowed to help them fight back against foreign competition. Meanwhile, European airlines have implored the European Commission to draft stronger aviation laws that will enforce protectionist regulations in favor of the large native companies. Nevertheless, imposing punitive measures against the Gulf airlines will not be so straightforward. For one, domestic networks such as JetBlue, Air Berlin, Ryanair, and others have asked their authorities to stay out of the aviation laws. Many of the domestic airlines rely on the current agreements. For example, FedEx Express, which is the world's largest cargo carrier, depends on the Open Skies agreements to keep its operations running efficiently. The contradiction of financial interests has upset the traditional European and North American multinationals. Namely, they are losing domestic and international customers. For instance, while domestic airlines gain ground on local consumers, at an international scale, airlines from the Gulf are claiming their own stake in the aviation industry. However, Doha's current diplomatic crisis presents an opportunity for rival companies. Depending on the duration of the crisis, the United States and the European Union can exploit the situation and introduce additional restrictions on Qatar Airways. But in the long term, the fortune of being positioned at the center of flight paths connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa implies that the commercial Gulf airlines will continue to play an increasingly important role, especially since the Arab monarchies seek to reform their economies and move away from energy revenues. Anyway, this was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. I want to express my gratitude to the following people on Patreon. Their contributions and that of many others have made this report possible. And if you want to help us to produce more content, please check out our fundraising page at patreon.com/Caspian report. Anyway, thanks again and sağ ol.